The Insiders Case. The hearing of arguments ended at the trial over opposition politicians in the Oktau court. Shadows disappear at noon. The extremism trio: authorities, crime, and religion. One step forward, two steps back. Historic role of individuals and the personality cult of the head of state. Hello, I'm Asylbek Abdulov and you're watching Vlast KZ on KpLus channel. On Tuesday, Oktober saw the speedy retrial of Arak Sarbapeyev. The former mayor of Zhanaozen was sentenced to 10 years in prison and confiscation of property for conspiring and attempting a crime, although the bribe charges were all dropped. Thus, the former mayor of Zhanaozen was put in jail on a third attempt. The first jury trial in Oktau was halted following the objections of the prosecutor, who had photo evidence that Sarbapeev's supporters contacted some of the jurors. The second time the trial was also held in Oktau, but with a new panel of jurors. Sarbapeyev was acquitted and released in the courtroom. However, the Mangistau prosecutor's office protested against the verdict. The former official was once again arrested, and finally his saga came to an end last week with quite a harsh sentence. Yermohamed Yurtazbayev, in his interview to KpLus, spoke about the reasons behind the prolonged retribution of the former Zhanaozen mayor, among other things.
За что ему стыдно. Есть закон. Он попросил суд присяжных в первом судебном процессе.
In the first hearing, he asked for the jury-based trial, but it is in the law if the defendant is asking for jury-based trial, it should be provided to him. As far as I know, the investigation provided irrefutable evidence to the court on his involvement to the budget embezzlement and so on. The jury acquitted him, but not simply acquitted him, but in the evening of the same day, almost all members of the jury, and there is a police information and video evidence, they came to Sarbapeyev's place as guests for Bishbarmak, the national meal. This is disgraceful because when the Gorbachev's perestroika was initiated, democracy, freedom of speech, one of the demands was the jury trial, and it was provided. And now, can you imagine this type of disgraceful things happening? When the general prosecutor was informed about this, he immediately protested the jury decision, and the second court was already different and objective. Documents were provided, the court looked whether there were embezzlements or not, and then this harsh verdict was passed: 10 years in prison with confiscation of property. Because Zhanaozen was partially a disaster and a big mistake of the authorities, but there were many other mistakes, including those made by the local authorities and the governor. We have a constitution. Starting from age 18, everyone must justify his actions. If you're appointed as the governor, if you were given the budget, if you see that the situation is intensifying, if you see that oil workers are striking for several months in a row, if at that very moment, instead of talking with the people, making steps towards them, negotiate, he was embezzling state funds, and all of that was proved by the court, this is terrible in all respects and shameful. Even I am ashamed, the one who lives in Astana, because there is no justification here. The harsh sentence for a former official is intended to balance out the upcoming severe sentence of oppositionist Vladimir Kozlov in the eyes of the public. During the trial in Oktau, the prosecutors requested the judge to sentence him to 9 years in prison, 4 years for Serik Sapargali and 5 years for Akjanat Aminov. During the hearing of parties' arguments, which went on throughout the past week, Aminov fully admitted his guilt and Sapargali did it partially. The die-hard Vladimir Kozlov is still holding his ground and sees no wrong in his actions.
Sakim Zamanbekov is a native of Oktau. He is coming to Mangistau's specialized court for a month and a half, as if it is his job. The retiree is observing the trial over Vladimir Kozlov, Serik Sapargali, and Akjanat Aminov, and can voice his thoughts on it, albeit reluctantly. I cannot label them criminals. On the contrary, they helped those sitting in the square without jobs and rallying. There are talks that these strikes were later politicized, but who needs that? What is clear is that none of the witnesses said they were guilty. Moreover, they helped materially, bought airfare tickets even if they had to loan the money, but they never let them without support. The prosecution is of a different opinion. Zhanaev asked 4 to 9 years for this material assistance and legal support. Alga Party leader Vladimir Kozlov is incriminated with 9 years in prison. Oil worker Aminov 5 and 4 for Serik Sapargali. Civil observers conclude it is a political order. The trial is purely political and therefore the verdict quite expected, but I was still hoping the human factor would have some effect. As you see, political orders are followed here without hesitation. Earlier in the week, Kozlov spoke at the hearing. His address to the court and the public lasted 3 days. Kozlov expressed gratitude to the prosecutor for the opportunity to repent, but the prosecution that came alive had to cool it at Kozlov's next phrase. I cannot admit my guilt because that would mean betrayal of those who suffered at the square on December 16th. People in uniforms just like yours are guilty of these murders and woundings. They were the ones that shot at the backs of those running away and were only punished lightly. Later, Alga Party leader returned to the square in Zhanaozen on December 16th. He spoke about the strikers' psychological state with whom the government was unable to settle the labor dispute for more than 7 months, as well as about how they were treated by the police. No one in the square could believe that live rounds would be shot at them. Even as the first shots sounded, they thought it were rubber bullets. The footage shows how a young man is throwing stones at these armed robots. You do not throw stones when you expect something other than rubber bullets being shot at you. The young man later falls and tries to crawl, but he's beaten by these brutes. None of the victims received treatment. In fact, they hid their wounds in their homes, since a wounded person was the same as criminal at the time. At the closing, Vladimir Kozlov noted that he knew from the start the case against him was fabricated and ordered from above. He pointed out that not all responsible for the tragedy in Zhanaozen bore responsibility. Law enforcement officials do not use firearms against millions of people. 200 policemen. This is exactly the number mentioned by Yashmanov Sarbapeyev in the morning of December 16th. 200 policemen shot peaceful, escaping citizens, and we will live with it for years to come. And I absolutely disagree that I am being made part of this dishonorable case. While in Oktober, the leader of Alga Party was voicing his arguments and action in support of Kozlov, Sapargali, and Aminov over the incitement of social hatred case was held in Warsaw, Poland. Civil activists from Kazakhstan, Belgium, Belarus, and Russia unwrapped posters in front of the building where OSCE was holding a conference of human dimension. Another representative of the official Akorda presidential political advisor, Yermuhamed Yirtizbayev, unexpectedly disagreed with the decision of the prosecution. According to him, Vladimir Kozlov is certainly guilty, but there's no need to imprison him. The suspended sentence would be enough. Otherwise, the conviction immediately cuts all political claims of Alga Party leader. If I were to make a decision, it is obvious to me that he contributed towards inciting social hatred. However, 9 years in prison is a bit harsh and cruel from my point of view. Perhaps 4 to 5 years of suspended sentence is fairly severe because you have a criminal record. Whereas the previous acquittal of the former mayor of Zhanaozen, Orak Sarbapeyev, by Oktober court was apparently too soft. Attorney General's office contested a judge's decision and the case was transferred to Oktober, where just in 6 days of hearings the jury found the former mayor guilty and the judge has sentenced him to 10 years in a maximum security prison with confiscation of property. The court finds you guilty under Article 24, Part 3 and Article 311, Part 5 and sentences you to 10 years in prison. You will be doing time in the maximum security colony. My son is not guilty. He is innocent. There is no evidence of him committing a crime. He was sentenced to 10 years. Is this law even legit? There is no evidence other than the testimony of a drug addict. Such a quick verdict for the nearly justified former official is quite contrary to the future verdict in the case of Kozlov, Sapargali, and Aminov, says human rights activist Aysel Nurgaziyeva. She was outraged by the fact that the ex-mayor's sentence for corruption was not held liable for Zhanaozen events. There is a specific issue of staying liability for inciting social hatred, and the fact that he embezzled the money, these people say who in this country does not steal it does not concern them, whereas those who are responsible for the execution of December 16 should be held liable. This is not political, it is a labor dispute between the employer and the employee. Do you want to receive your salary to get paid for what you've earned? The oil workers who had a bad experience emphasized this is not a political but only a labor dispute. On Friday, more than 500 workers of Munai Field Service stopped the operation of the company. The workers have not been paid since May, and the union leaders cannot get the company founders to sign off on the new collective agreement. We have nowhere else to go. These people here need answers. Whatever they said cannot be considered an answer. Continue to work and we will pay you someday. People do not want to work for free. This footage of July 24th made during the strike in Munai Field Service when newly appointed Mayor Serik Baytrumov arrived and the labor dispute was resolved. But he had to visit this enterprise. The workers claimed that none of the terms of the approved collective agreement were observed. Company founders refused to talk to strikers. One of the hired managers has to do it. It is used to be a very profitable enterprise. However, now we are bankrupt. We owe to KplusTV, Kpplus. We owe to everybody. We cannot even pay the salaries because our accounts are blocked. We issue salaries without bonuses. The General Prosecutor's Office decided that instead of our accountants, the bailiffs will be taking care of payroll issues. Was there an audit? Yes, we had it before, and I was even working here. But I do not know what happened to the money earned by the workers. Who are the founders? I only heard the name Sidov Andrei. I do not know anything more about him. The workers of Munai Field Service say that Andrei Sidov is apparently a figurehead, because nobody has ever seen him during the 8 years of company operations. Yet the main question is, how did the profitable company that services oil wells suddenly appeared on the verge of bankruptcy? Instead of paying $500 million, it is much easier to go bankrupt and sell it under a different name to open a new one. So we are interested to see what is going to happen in the coming months. The rumors are that this organization will no longer exist. This means that all 530 people will become unemployed, and perhaps this is going to happen one day. This will remain as it is unless people decide to rise. Convicted Orak Sarbapeev's successor, Mayor of Zhanaozen Serik Baytrumov, who participated in Munai Field Service Commission of Conciliation, is inclined to acknowledge the demands of the workers are legitimate. It seems he can only help them by the cliché, "You have got to work."
На неделе президент подписал указ о новом составе правительства во главе с Сериком Ахметовым.
Last week, the president signed a decree approving the new cabinet headed by Serik Akhmetov. Reshuffling of the old government didn't ignite much interest. Unlike the fall trajectory of the former president's chief of staff Aslan Musin, it is commonly believed that he's the victim of clan wars and just lost in a personal battle to a long-time associate of the head of state, the national security leader Nurtai Abakayev. This picture with the half-smile of Abakayev and the lost expression of Musin partially reflects a new power balance in Nazarbayev's entourage. The longest surviving prime minister in the history of Kazakhstan, Karim Masimov, now occupies a key office as the chief of staff, guarding direct access to the president. The Russian media, while commenting on staff changes in the president's administration, consistently emphasized Masimov's role as a possible successor of Nursultan Nazarbayev. This, however, didn't stop Izvestia from double misnaming him Karen Maksimov.
У нового премьер-министра довольно распространенное для Казахстана имя и фамилия.
On the other hand, the new premier has quite an ordinary name for Kazakhstan. Serik Akhmetov is almost a John Smith in the US, but the ordinariness ends there, as not everyone has a resume that almost copycats the biography of the country's first president. Yet a similar biography gives no grounds and certainly guarantee for the future succession to the throne.
Будущего мандата на престолонаследие.
Congratulations, Serik. We wish you to be a successful prime minister, an example for the people. This is how the former KVN Comedy Club member Anwar Nurpeisev and singer Olzhas Stambekov reacted to the main news of the week. Kazakhstan got its new prime minister on Monday. The seemingly irreplaceable Karim Masimov was finally replaced by Serik Akhmetov. But no sooner did the change-craving public come alive, the new premier quenched their enthusiasm. I would like to point out that we will maintain succession and use the experience of the last government. We are expected to do real work, and we must fulfill these expectations. Whose expectations must the old new cabinet fulfill was understood without explanation. There he is, Serik Nigmetovich, 54 years old, metallurgical engineer, manufacturer, made his way up from the bottom, followed orders precisely and with knowledge. After such a recommendation at the start of the week, the new Prime Minister's candidacy was approved by everyone and a row of comparisons appeared in the press. Just like the president, 54-year-old Serik Akhmetov started out as a metallurgist. They both even worked at the same company when they were young, Karmet Kombinat. The new PM's biography can serve as an example for Kazakh officials. Born in Temirtau, served in the Komsomol, went into business in the early 90s. His political career began 15 years ago when he became mayor of Temirtau. By 2006, he was already Minister of Transport and Communication. It was under his watch that freight cars began to be built in Kazakhstan. Railway transport tariffs saw a 15% increase, and subcontractors were forced to become more accountable for road repair works. Meanwhile, citizens of Kazakhstan were being actively introduced to higher standards. We need to improve our regional air fleet in order to lower tariffs. I believe our people can afford to allow themselves to fly. Serik Nigmetovich gained even more popularity in his home region of Karaganda when he was appointed governor of the mining region in 2009. As was rumored at the time, Oktober was testing Akhmetov on his thriftiness by entrusting him with the biggest and most complicated industrial zone in the country. Results followed almost immediately. The region shot up the ranks in all indicators. 30 socially implemented objects were launched. Infant mortality went down, while the region's football club became national champions for the first time in 50 years. I think Serik Akhmetov was much better than the governors after him. Order and cleanliness in all these years. Our Karaganda became such a city you can see for yourselves. Our avenues, a lot of playgrounds were built in the courtyards. I remember we were all sorry when he left. A hard worker like him could not go unnoticed in Oktober, and Karim Masimov himself came after Akhmetov in January 2012. I would like to read out the President's decree appointing Akhmetov Serik Nigmetovich first Deputy Prime Minister of the Republic of Kazakhstan, releasing him from Karaganda Region Governor's duties. Congratulations. Akhmetov begins to work harder than ever on his new post. Here he is on a working visit in Zhanaozen, attempting to establish ties with oil workers who were on strike earlier. In Zhambul region, he is checking the work of a greenhouse. And in Shymkent, he is controlling rescue operations during the spring floods. The Deputy Prime Minister is serious and demanding everywhere. There is only one person who can fluster him. We have not seen so much water since the 60s. They say that every time. They do say that every time, but there really was a lot of water. We flew over 4 areas by helicopter. There is so much water. To be sure, Nursultan Nazarbayev's strictness is more an indicator of his disposition. Around the same time, the president expresses active interest in the same sports as Serik Akhmetov. First, the president attends an exhibition hockey game. Then the Republican Football Super Cup with the participation of Karaganda's Shakhter, whose games Akhmetov is closely following even from Astana. Both sports happen to be to the national leader's liking. In the meantime, each video of Akhmetov's working visit is diligently uploaded on the internet. His face is shown on TV screens more often than other officials. Meanwhile, Karim Masimov is slowly fading into the background. As far as I understand, he was conditioned for the PM's post since January. Also, the main reason why Masimov left is physical fatigue. He was just dead tired. This happened at a relatively calm period when some issues were settled, namely the financial crisis, terrorist acts, and what happened in Zhanaozen. A period to take care of personal projects. Serik Akhmetov's main project is to develop 27 monocities like Zhanaozen by 2015. The new Prime Minister is offering to build greenhouses and develop infrastructure in settlements with nothing more than a city-forming enterprise. Another of Serik Nigmetovich's ideas is to teach ordinary Kazakh citizens to save natural resources. I repeat, we are an arid country. We must save water. As observers note, Serik Akhmetov developed a good relationship with all key figures of authority by the time of his appointment, so much so that he did not have to change the cabinet of ministers too much, with most of them remaining in their seats. Only 3 department heads were replaced, while in the last 2 weeks the main political transfers occurred between 2 buildings, Oktober and the government. Chief of Staff Aslan Musin was dismissed first. Now he is the head of the Accounts Committee. He was replaced by Karim Masimov, who headed the cabinet of ministers for 6 years. 2 ministers followed and joined the president's team. Gulshara Abdukalikova moved from the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection, as did Yerzhan Kazakhanov from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. From now on, they are both advisors to the president. They were replaced by Serik Abzenov from West Kazakhstan region and Yerlan Idrisov, former ambassador to the United States. Another minister, that of Economic Development, Bakarjan Sagentayev, was transferred to Nurotan as deputy chairman. He was replaced by Yerbolat Dosayev. Meanwhile, Serik Akhmetov got another deputy, former advisor to the national leader, Krymbek Kushurbayev. Thus, the current state of affairs in the highest echelons of power were reinstated at least until the new year. Experts say no more reshuffles should be expected until then. Political expert Rasul Jomali sees a definite plus in it: stability. The main influence, in fact, stays in the same hands. Whatever the changes, Masimov will curate the government's activity. He will oversee it and make certain changes. The government in this case is only an apparatus that will execute these orders. To be honest, I do not envy Serik Akhmetov. He has a giant task ahead of him. According to presidential advisor Yermohamed Yertuzbayev, the main problem to solve for the new cabinet is another wave of the financial crisis. The president himself noted that Karim Masimov handled the first wave quite well. If the 8th prime minister shows results, he has all the chances to break the previous record and stay on board even longer. In case of failure, the government has already received its first gentle warning.
Next on Vlast KZ. Shadows disappear at noon. The extremism trio: authorities, crime, and religion. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Historic role of individuals and the personality cult of the head of state. Stay with us, Vlast KZ will return with more in a couple of minutes.
Главные события в Казахстане. Достоверные факты. Эксклюзивные комментарии. Читайте в Казахстане информационно-аналитический портал «Республика». Чтобы обойти блокировки, воспользуйтесь доменом respublikas.info. Вы окажетесь на так называемом прокси-портале. Специально разработанные канадскими специалистами по интернет-технологиям, прокси-порталы помогают пользователям получать информацию в тех странах, где блокируют интернет-ресурсы. В Китае, Иране, в Казахстане. Вы принимаете условия использования системы и попадаете на страницу информационно-аналитического портала «Республика». Материалы интернет-портала также доступны пользователям всемирной сети Facebook. facebook.com/respublika.kaz. Если вы хотите поделиться информацией, вам есть что рассказать, звоните в редакцию «Республики». Наши телефоны в Казахстане +7 727 273 92 95, в Москве +7 495 621 87 03.
Новости Казахстана на казахском языке смотрите в 21:00 и далее каждый нечетный час. Новости Казахстана на русском языке в 22:00 и далее каждый четный час. Новости Казахстана на английском языке смотрите в 16:30, 17:30, 18:30 и 19:30 со вторника по субботу. Время Астаны. Изготовление и размещение рекламы на канале KplusTV.
Важное признание на неделе сделала пресс-служба Министерства внутренних дел.
Last week, the Interior Ministry made one important statement. Apparently, there are grounds to believe that the Ilha Alatown National Park massacre was committed by the members of the extremist religious group, whose identities were already confirmed. This was the very group that rented the house in the village Tausamal of the Almaty region, the one figuring in the accidental explosion case in July, and the very group that was almost entirely terminated during a special operation in the village Baganashil.
Тогда большая часть группировки была уничтожена, заявляет
The law
полицейский.
enforcement are now busy tracing the remaining members, the 37-year-old Kairov Sayan Maksutli and 34-year-old Zaurbek Batabayev.
Заурбека, 78-го года рождения.
More on the subject, the next report from Atyrau, which has evidently become not only the oil capital of Kazakhstan, but also a hotbed of religious extremism. Our movement is similar to what the mosque does. It's just we've got different approaches. The theologian Ashabai Medetov provides counseling for Atyrau citizens in a small office located in a rough part of the town. From 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. it's open for anyone to visit and talk about religion. The Shapagat Center, supported by the city administration and funded by the budget, provides public awareness and assistance to citizens affected by destructive religious movements. This is an official mission of the center. Visitors of the center are guaranteed an absolute confidentiality. People turn to us for help for various reasons. Some are concerned that their son grew out a beard, others are worried that their child attends the mosque on the regular basis. Most of the times we counsel the parents whose kids fell under influence of extremist movements, says Ashabai Medetov. The families rarely succeed to bring the so-called misled believers to the center. We usually deal with the followers of Salafism and Wahhabism, said Medetov. In Atyrau region, these movements are promoted by theologians who received education in the Arab world and are mostly followed by the local young men aged 15 to 25. Ashabai believes that poverty and lack of prospects do not affect a man's religious choice. Your wealth doesn't guarantee your children from the impact of destructive organizations or movements. First of all, it's the matter of relationships within the family. If your child is missing out on the warm relationship and spirituality in the family, he will look for it on the side, and once he finds it with the other movements, he becomes attached to them. On the contrary, the public activist Ilyas Musayev believes that unviable social conditions of the people in the region force many of them into radical Islam. Ilyas works for a foreign company in the oil sector, and he's very familiar with how difficult it is to get a good job here. Musayev has an active citizenship. He participates in all the rallies and pickets. First of all, the state-run TV channels like Khabar and Kazakhstan broadcast a large-scale disinformation, the real brainwashing, and secondly, people are simply afraid of the authorities. We all know that our authorities used to be highly criticized, and the attempts of the mass protests, even the one-man protests, were always suppressed. According to Musayev, the terrorist attacks are results of pressure exerted on religious movements for many years from the law enforcement. Numerous arrests, trials, prison sentences, and even public executions do not improve the situation, said Ilyas. Religious propaganda firmly occupied the voids in the hearts and minds of our countrymen. The state doesn't have a firm ideology, while the ideology of praising Nuratan and Nazarbayev is not so compelling for young people, no matter how hard the authorities try. In fact, it doesn't unify them, nor it gives them any purpose in life. Therefore, they resort to religion. Official clergy of Atyrau region have been trying to draw the attention of the secular authorities to the situation in the region for a few years already, said Naib Imam of the Central Mosque, Yerkebulan Karikulov. He's convinced that those responsible for the recent terrorist attacks in the region cannot be considered Muslims. Suicide in Islam is one of the deadliest sins. According to the Imam, terrorists represent the Neo-Harijite movement, which originated from Salafism. These people use religion as a front. A person possessing a weapon has already stepped into the crime and, of course, is connected to it. Therefore, we cannot ignore that these people might be linked to the criminal world. Youth of Atyrau have been largely taking interest in the Islam for the past 5 years, but only a few attend the official mosque to study Hanafi Mazhab, the law school of Islam, traditional for Kazakhstan. It's not that difficult to tell a traditional Muslim from the radical one, if you know what questions to ask. It's unfair and hasteful to label the person by his appearance. Unfortunately, people already have a stereotype that a man with a beard and short pants has to be a radical, but it isn't so. Wahhabism is an ideology in the first place. There are few ways to identify them. They ignore mazhabs, renounce the official clergy, and reject the national traditions and values. These are the 3 key points. Whereas the opposition journalist from Atyrau, Zhumabay Daspanov, is convinced that in order to understand the reasons behind the terrorist attacks in the region, we need to pay attention to the following three key points: the power, crime, and religion. The elite of the president's circle of close associates is rushing to replace him because Nazarbayev has passed his 70s, and what if something happens to him? They rush to replace him even before it happens. Zhumabay Daspanov suggests that the terrorist activity outburst in the region was caused by reshuffle in Akorda and in the Atyrau region, including the hasty escape of the ex-governor Bergiris Kaliyev, the arrests of officials and businessmen, and dismissal of the former head of the president's administration, Aslan Musin. While religious movements is just a cover-up, said Daspanov. 1 out of 1,000, that is unconventional religion. People don't like them, they don't affect the situation much. At most, there is only 10,000 of them in Kazakhstan. But it's important to realize that real modern gangsters are behind them, and they have weapons. The alley next to the central mosque in Almaty attracts young people round the clock. It is some kind of a rendezvous point for young people who arrive in the metropolis for knowledge and work. The representatives of the official clergy consider them as a ready-to-go congregation. Despite the official ban on religious propaganda outside the mosque, it seems borderline sinful not to take the opportunity to reach out for people. Whoever comes from villages at first hangs around here. The students gather here as well after school. It's considered somewhat of a center. Sometimes people drink and misbehave here. I saw the imam talking to them, offering them to attend the mosque instead of spending time on the street. He's not preaching, but he welcomes them to the mosque all the time. Timur Kusainov arrived in Almaty from a small village in Yenbekshi, Kazakh district. He studied economics and graduated with honors, yet he failed to work on the specialty. I didn't have the proper connection, said Timur. Now he works as a salesperson at the Green Bazaar, earning $13 a day, which is enough for food and renting a room. Once he was approached by the imam on this alley, who offered him to attend the mosque. Ever since, Timur has been reading prayers. He says that faith helps him in his life. I've been attending the mosque on Fridays. I want to marry a girl who's a believer and doing the prayers as well. She doesn't necessarily have to wear the burqa, but I see nothing wrong with it. I'll be doing the prayers 5 times a day. The line between faith and salvation and religion as the opium of the people is known to be very subtle. The sole survivor of the special operation, the 20-year-old Kultsari resident Aldiyar Saparov, began testifying. Upon receiving a severe injury and undergoing a surgery, he was arrested by the police. Perhaps his testimony will result in a new wave of arrests of suspected terrorists and extremists and their confessions. In the meantime, the regional court of Atyrau issues house arrest warrants for very secular people, officials and businessmen, including the Director General of State Expertise Turlanbek Jainbayev, Director of Arkaim 2005 Alexander Kuzema, and Director of LLP Stroy Contract Group Azamat Kurmantayev. The former governor of Atyrau, Askar Kerimov, was arrested as well. The whereabouts of the former head of Atyrau region, Bergiris Kaliyev, is still unknown. The elimination of officials conquers with termination of terrorists, yet it doesn't seem to be a coincidence. The Education Ministry is currently working on recommendations for the textbooks on the history of modern Kazakhstan. The main idea behind the initiative is to use, quote, educational practices and methodologies to emphasize the historical role of the nation's leader, Nursultan Nazarbayev, in the formation of an independent state in order to foster patriotism among the younger generation. Another brick in the wall of the personality cult of the head of state was the presentation of his largest mural yet, 32 square meters of pure worshipping. Indeed, the authoritarianism inherent in gigantomania. Yet this is quite understandable in present conditions, as demand creates the supply. The biggest 32 square meter mural of Nazarbayev is decorating the Hall of Law University of Astana. On this wall, the artist has depicted an opening ceremony of the new university building 4 years ago. The national leader Nursultan Nazarbayev is in the center, the governor Imangaliy Tasmagambetov is to the left, and the university rector, the person who actually ordered this painting, Maksud Narikbayev, is to the right. The president is portrayed walking one step ahead of the group. Imangaliy Tasmagambetov walks half a step right behind him. In terms of the visual perspective and visual angle, from the left, his body should look 1.5 centimeters smaller. So you're saying none of them should be portrayed taller than Nursultan Nazarbayev? That's correct. The artist Amanat Nazarkulov drew this mural in 9 months. He copied faces of the main characters, swept those who stood behind the president. The creative process has coincided with university teaching, therefore he had to work on the mural during breaks between classes. The students considered the mural to be a good decoration for an empty hall. I really like this mural because Nazarbayev is portrayed in the first place. He sticks out on the painting very much. Galina talks about the president during a lesson of history of Kazakhstan. The teacher relates the past 20 years of independence with the work of national leader. Every citizen of our country, starting with preschool age, knows who the president is and his role in the development of our independent country. When studying the constitution of Kazakhstan during the Man and Society class, we discussed the great contribution made by the president so that we would live in the peaceful and friendly environment. Galina implements a special online training program at her classes. Explaining the new topic to the students, the teacher shows pictures of historical figures, documents and relevant videos using an interactive whiteboard and computers. She adds the president talked about introducing such system in his article, 20 Steps Towards a Society of Universal Labor. Now Galina's students know whom to thank for a happy childhood. We receive a top-notch education. We study using computers and interactive whiteboards, thanks to the president who introduced an electronic education. Our president said that the future is in the hands of our young people. He puts high hopes in us. We need to work hard in order to justify his hopes, never skipping a history lesson. I'd like them to give us more information on the presidents and the contemporary history lessons, so that he is remembered by the new generation, just as Lenin. The history books will emphasize the role of national leader in the formation of an independent state. This was recommended to the Ministry of Education by the members of the working group examining the textbooks. A meeting of the commission was held this week. In addition, experts recommended to introduce a general history textbook for high school students to enhance scientific history research and to improve the skills of teachers. We need a new generation textbooks that meet Western standards. We need to attract new authors and elaborate recommendations to improve the quality of teaching in schools and universities. Galina Sobolevskaya, the history teacher of school number 53, who had several classes of patriots graduated, supported the decision of the working group. I don't believe this is some sort of an idolatry. This has to do with the respect for a man who really proved himself. He is highly respected among our people. This is nothing but respect and gratitude. Therefore, our people are not going to complain after they already showed him their loyalty.
Вы смотрели программу.
This was Vlast KZ on KplusTV channel. Trends, highlights and personalities of the past 7 days. Goodbye.
И до новых встреч.